What's up guys, Asian here again with another PTS video, and today we're going to be continuing our discussion on the Necromancer and how it performs in the three different roles in MMOs, a traditional tank, healer, DPS trinity, as well as how they compare to, at the very least, what is the current meta in Wrathstone. So just bear in mind that we are still in that first week of the PTS, so there's still quite a bit of tuning that needs to be done, and a lot of rebalancing that needs to be done with Necromancer skills. The ZOS devs have already acknowledged that there are a few bugs that they have to fix. And that Necromancer in general is a little bit overtuned, particularly in the DPS department. So as the weeks go by and the PTS cycle continues to evolve, we will eventually revisit where Necromancers stand in comparison to the other classes in those three different roles. So we'll be taking a look at stamina DPS, magic DPS, tanking, and healing. So 4 different roles that the Necromancer can kind of fall into. And we'll start things off first with the role that I'm the most comfortable with, and that is tanking. So because Necromancers pretty much have access to all of these traditional skill lines, so weapon, armor, world, those kind of things, really going to be focusing in on what the class itself is able to bring. So Gravelord, Bone Tyrant, and Living Death, those skill lines, and what they can bring to the table that other classes can't. So in terms of this tanking discussion, we're taking a look at primarily comparing to DKs and Wardens, because those are the 2 most common tanking classes in Wrathstone right now. So the big thing with Necromancers, and Leova has touched upon this on the forums and in Toxic Rating environment as well, is the fact that you have some insane ultimate generation necrotic potency. The necrotic potency basically allows you to get 6 ultimate for every corpse nearby. It has a 12-meter radius, so pretty much the exact same as something like Repentance. So this gives you a huge ultimate boost, particularly if you combine it with a lot of different skills that you have that create corpses. So for example, you should be running Summoner's Armor, so that creates a corpse when it's completed or when you reactivate it after 10 seconds. You should be running Spirit Guardian or Intensive Mender is what Leofa recommends, so you can get more corpses up more quickly. So this is every 8 seconds or every 4 seconds if you're using Intensive Mender. So you already have 2 corpses just from those 2 abilities already. And then I believe you could also use potentially other abilities as well, or add pulls, for example, in order to get more ultimate. So if you have, just for example, Summoner's Armor, and you have the Spirit Guardian morph, then you have 2 corpses and you can activate necrotic potency every 10 seconds, and you'd be able to get 12 ultimate, plus you would also be able to get additional ultimate every 16 seconds with the corpse consumption passive here. So really high ultimate generation here if you build around that. So definitely something that I would recommend taking a look into if you want to play a Necromancer tank. A couple of other skills that really stand out to me. So one of the big things with tanking is how strong is your self heals. So Templar tanks, for instance, and Nightblade tanks, at least in elsewhere, Nightblade tanks have a really weak self heal. Templar tanks have a weak self heal. So it really depends on what your self heal looks like, and Necromancers definitely have a pretty decent self heal through Hungry Sight. So it uses magicka and it deals some damage and it heals you, and if you Hungry Sight, it gives you a little bit of a heal over time effect. Plus it also gives you additional heal for every enemy you hit. So right now I'm on a DPS spec, so can't exactly really get a good comparison, but as a tank spec, this was able to heal me for about 7k or so, and then when you take into consideration the heal over time, it ends up being a little bit better. I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but this is actually quite comparable to Green Dragon Blood. It's a little bit cheaper than Green Dragon Blood, plus you can also obviously crit heal with this, so the healing potential with Hungry Sight is actually really strong, especially in trash pulls where you have multiple things that you might be able to hit with the scythe and get some really nice heals that way. Other thing for tanking is the Frozen Colossus. Now I've already did a little bit of mathematics earlier, taking a look at the Frozen Colossus compared to Warhorn on a Necromancer tank, Necromancer support role in general, and this was before the change to cost of the ultimate itself. So with the new ulti cost, it ends up being that they're still a little bit very comparable. The Colossus does give out just a little bit more DPS, just looking at major force versus the major vulnerability. But if you take into consideration Warhorn's additional stats, Warhorn ends up pulling a little bit ahead, just barely. They're very, very comparable to each other here. But both of those ultimates are used in different scenarios, so the Colossus would be used more if you want to get a lot of burst DPS going. So for example, let's say you're doing Asylum. Holmes is vulnerable for only about 10 seconds or so. You'd be able to use 2 Colossuses within that time to get that full 10 seconds of major vulnerability, which might be better than using Warhorn when Holmes is vulnerable. So that's one example that I can think of where you might want to do something like Colossus rather than Warhorn instead. But this is definitely an ultimate that is pretty nice for tanks and just gives you an additional option, another ultimate option. Then of course you'll have the res ulti, which is fantastic for progression groups. It just allows you to res 3 people instantly. So really, really strong here. Necromancer tank running this can definitely really help out the group just by popping this ultimate and getting everybody back up here. You also have a self-purge, which tanks, DK tanks and Warden tanks don't have unless you're running the Blue Betty as a Warden tank, which you normally wouldn't. So that's really helpful. You don't have to rely on your healer, for example, to run purge, and you don't have to run purge yourself. You get to save that magicka and just end up using health for your own personal purge here. And finally, if you decide to use the Spirit Guardian morph rather than the intensive Mender morph, you do get a little bit of additional damage mitigation there. So Necromancer tanks, at least right now as the first week of the PTS, is looking like to be a very, very viable tank. I would definitely recommend groups take a look at running a Necromancer off tank, potentially even a Necromancer main tank. So really, really nice here. The one thing that I found was a little bit challenging was sort of coordinating the corpse uses. It's a little bit challenging to kind of keep track of everything that way, but if you're able to manage that, you have some really sick ulti gen, and you have some pretty good tankiness as well. Now, over to the stamina DPS and magic DPS side, we'll be talking about both of these at the same time. Right now on the PTS, it's bugged, so the pets are basically 100% critting all the time, and of course Necromancers are a little bit overtuned. Zos is already aware of that, but if they tone it down a little bit and they fix the pet crit bug, then I think Necromancers are very competitive with the top end DPS. I would probably say they probably will not end up being the highest DPS. Again, we'll have to take a look at how the PTS plays out, what sort of new balance changes are coming in the coming weeks, but I do not anticipate Necromancers necessarily being the very top DPS out of the 6 classes. It'll probably be somewhere in the 2nd or 3rd rank for both magicka and stamina, but definitely not top. I think there might be other classes that end up beating out Necromancer DPS. That being said, though, Necromancer DPS do bring a couple of things to the table that other classes might not necessarily be able to bring. One of the big things is an additional synergy. So for magicka Necromancer specifically, you will be using Boneyard as one of your abilities, and this does provide a synergy. So you do provide an additional synergy to the group, so that's obviously very helpful for Alclash uptimes, and especially if you have stamina DPS who are running the new set Tooth of Lucastes, it gives them additional synergy to maintain that uptime on Boneyard here. And from there, there's not really too much. I guess there's also the Frozen Colossus morph, which is pretty much universal across all the different roles. Definitely can use this on any of the roles, healer, tank, or DPS. So this is really nice to have. The more Necromancer DPS you have in the group, you're able to coordinate this out and get some good major vulnerability uptime here. For magic DPS specifically, I didn't find that sustain was that big of an issue. Of course, one of the key things in doing good DPS is being able to sustain your rotation. So on a Necromancer DPS running Clockwork Switch's Fillet, I didn't have any sustain problems, and that's mainly because of Mystic Siphon, which gives me magicka back. So didn't really have any issues there, and I was running Flame enchant on the front bar and a Berserker enchant on the back bar, so I wasn't using Absorbed Magicka, I wasn't using the Atronex Mundus obviously, so this was just with Gold Food and Mystic Siphon. I was able to sustain very, very well, and I didn't really feel like I had any issues sustaining even in Execute. That is one thing that I don't like about, that I should say, that the Necromancers are lacking in, and that's in Execute. You do have the Great Lore of Passive Death Knell, which gives you additional crit strike chance, but that's not the same as an actual Execute ability, and there's a very good chance this is going to be toned down a little bit in the upcoming weeks. I wouldn't be surprised if we cut this effectiveness in half, so it's only 5% versus 10% for each Great Lord ability slotted. So Necromancers, you guys do not have an Execute ability, so you will end up losing a little bit of strength on Bloodthirsty. Bloodthirsty is still going to be the strongest jewelry trait for you to use, but very similarly to like the Dragon Knights, you won't really have an execute to really make the most use out of Bloodthirsty. From a stamina DPS side of things, I found Sustain was a little bit tricky to deal with. You don't have a Mystic Siphon that is a DPS ability. The closest one is Mortal Coil, which is a healing ability, so that doesn't really provide you many favors here. The alternative, which was recommended to me by somebody on Hellfire Dominion, I believe it was Catbug Pawn, he recommended that try using Summoner's Armor, which reduces the cost of Blast Bones and the Skeletal Archer by 12%. And once I used Summoner's Armor on the back bar and tried to maintain that, sustain was a little bit easier. I was able to fully sustain a light attack rotation using Artaeum Takeaway Broth on a Stamina Necromancer. So sustain is definitely a little bit more of a challenge on Stamina Necromancers compared to Magic Necromancers, but if you use Summoner's Armor, or I highly suspect that if you use Mortal Coil as well, you should be able to sustain a full light attack rotation on a raid dummy, and those parses took about 5 minutes or so, so pretty good overall as long as you're able to maintain those. So in terms of Necromancer DPS, it's a little bit hard to gauge where they stand compared to other classes because of the multiple bugs that are currently on the PTS, but I don't really anticipate Necromancers being the top dog, maybe number 2, maybe number 3 for Magicka DPS, but definitely not the number 1 spec for DPS at all. And finally, Necromancer healers. So I don't really heal too much. As I like to say, healing is my 3rd best role, but I have asked a couple of healer mains what their thoughts were on the Necromancer healer, so I have asked Heals to Feels, and I think Style Anima also gave some feedback, not to me specifically, but just kind of in Tux rating environment in general, kind of what their thoughts on the Necromancer healer is. And the general consensus is that Necromancer healers are pretty nice, but not necessarily for the reason that you think. So Heals to Feels specifically said that he feels that Necromancer healers may end up replacing Sword healers because Necromancer healers provide some additional unique synergies. So if you don't have a Necromancer DPS in group, especially Magicka Necromancers, if they end up being about 3rd in line in terms of DPS pecking order, then your Necromancer healer will be the only source for the Avid Boneyard synergy here, so that Grave Robber synergy. Then there are a few other synergies that you can also provide as well. So if you're stacked in group, you can provide the Agony Totem synergy, Pure Agony, which is very helpful as well. So yeah, you do have 2 unique synergies that you're able to provide as a Necromancer. Of course, there's also the Necromancer Res Ulti. Of course, we also have to talk about the Colossus as well. You can always use that on the as a healer here. Actual Necromancer healing skills themselves are a little bit lacking overall. Spirit Mender is pretty nice. It's a nice sort of passive heal. You don't really need to think about it. You just kind of activate it and just let it do its thing. Render Flesh and both of its morphs does apply Minor Defile to you, which is a little bit strange, and you kind of have to work around this, but this doesn't affect your healing output so much, so it's still pretty usable. And then Life Amid Death is just sort of like Budding Seeds, so still pretty nice. And then so Necromancer healers overall in terms of utility are probably going to be really comparable to Sword healers, if not a little bit better, because of those 2 unique synergies that you're able to provide, as long with if you do end up using Agony Totem, you also provide minor protection as well, so that's another kind of check mark for Necromancer healers. But if you want to compare them to like a Templar healer or Warden healer in terms of pure output or per utility, I think the Templar healer is still going to be a mainstay in endgame progression groups because of shards, the orbs, the just general healing output of the Templars, along with the Purify synergy. Wardens, on the other hand, while they do have minor toughness and they're a very easy source of minor intellect and minor endurance, they only have 1 unique synergy, and that's the Budding Seed synergy. But a minor toughness might make Warden healers more better for progression groups than a Necromancer healer would. But a Necromancer healer is definitely up there. It's very competitive when compared to the Templar and the Warden healer. So if you are a healer, I would probably say take a look at Necromancer healers, and I would definitely again kind of breathe a little bit, just wait and see where the PTS sort of takes shape, how they're going to rebalance Necromancer skills and things like that. But it's definitely something that you should keep your eye on if you are a healer, because of those 2 unique synergies that Necromancers are able to provide, along with a little bit of some group utility as well through minor protection, a very easy source of minor protection. Plus you also have, if you're able to get it to work, you can use renewing Undeath for a cheaper purge here as well. So that is it for this video. Let me know down in the description below if you guys have managed to play around with Necromancer on the PTS and what your thoughts are on the different roles, particularly from the healer side of things, because again, I don't really heal too much and I'm relying on other people to kind of give me their thoughts on Necromancer healing. So I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts on Necromancer healers in particular, but also the other 3 roles as well. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.